Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new video on Chapter 19XX, or Chapter 19, Part 2, A Glimpse in Time. This is an analysis video I've been wanting to do for a while on this chapter. For those of you who are unaware, this chapter is a really obscure Gaiden from Fire Emblem 7. In my opinion, it's one of the most ambitious chapters in FE7. I think it has a lot of cool ideas. The execution is middling, and the way you access it is just bizarre. It's just a really odd chapter in a game that is so much about accessibility. The fact this chapter exists feels like such an anomaly, and it's the kind of thing that IS has really gotten away from. And I want to talk about it because I know it's a chapter that a lot of people, even those who play FE7 a lot, haven't experienced. And I think it's worth talking about because it's so different. And I would say it's in my top 5 like FE7 chapters. And although it's the kind of thing that like you have to really go out of your way to plan for and play in a run, and a casual run at that, like this isn't something you're going to do like on a more like stringent like LTC or anything like that. So I want to spend some time talking about it because I think there's some interesting lessons for us all as hackers and fan game designers to consider. And I really want to break down like what was good, what was not so good, and just provide an overall summary of this chapter. So those of you who haven't experienced it can get a sense for what's going on because there's a lot of interesting nuggets and tidbits narratively that I'm really surprised intelligence systems just kind of threw into this really obscure Gaiden. So to give some context to the story, and you can see this is all happening on screen, you'll just see the whole story play out. Around this point in the game, Eliwood, Hector, Lynn, and the crew go to the Dread Isle. They are on their way to the Dragon's Gate, and after fighting Uhai when they land, that's the chapter where you recruit Dart and Fiora. Fight Uhai, you go to chapter 19X, where you fight Ion and meet Kashuna, the magic seal, for the first time. And then you access this chapter, 19XX, if you got Nils to level 7 in Lin mode. And this chapter is only accessible in Hector mode. So you would have had to play Eliwood mode through once, and then go through Lin mode again, get Nils to level 7, which is really hard. Like, you have to grind him. Like, I just, like, stood in front of London and just grinded him for, like, 40 turns to get him up to par because those chapters are not that long in Lin mode. And then play Hector mode again, unlock 19X, and then you unlock this chapter. And while I love the obscurity, it's really unintuitive. And for those of you who don't want to replay Lin mode, it's probably not going to be something that you'll ever do again. So it's really like a fun little Easter egg. And it makes me just like the whole chapter just kind of feels like something that they forgot about. Like, I feel like this chapter is very much an allegory for itself, like the way it was developed, right? Like, this chapter is really obscure requirements. It doesn't feel fully baked. It has a lot of things that like are incongruent to the rest of the game. And the story itself is really about like time forgotten. So narratively, to give you some context in the chapter, it's very heavily implied, and as you saw in the early parts of the video here, that a man brings 2 children here and says he'll be back for them. It's heavily implied that that man is Nurgle, and those 2 children are young Nils and Ninian, implying that Nurgle is their father. At the end of the map, spoilers, Nurgle shows up and he's like, "I think I forgot something," and I think that kind of confirms that he's very much was here those years ago and is that man in the previous cutscene. And Ninian too, like throughout the chapters, like, this feels oddly familiar. So it's just kind of like subtly, not so subtly hinting at them being related in some way. I love that the game never confirms this because modern IS would just like really like spell it out for you. But I like that they kind of made this a little bit more up to interpretation. Young me wasn't really sure what was happening here, but like reading it again as an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, this is obvious. But nevertheless, the setup of this map, you meet a druid named Theodore who's been chilling here, and he talks to you guys for a little bit, and then he talks about darkness and all that crap, and then it gets foggy, and then the map starts. So just right off the bat, I love the layout of this map. I really like the aesthetic of the Dragon's Gate maps and just the arc in general. I think it's like a pretty good like mid-game map. Um, the general setup encourages you to split. There's a really good anti-turtle in that there's a thief in this like thin like Murder Hollis corridor of death that's going towards the chests on the far right side, and you have to really like charge through to try and get it. So it's a bit risky, but usually your player units will be strong enough to deal with it. But you really have to run and chase them down because these thieves are fast. These thieves on Hector hard mode have capped speed, and so chances are you're not stealing anything back from them. So you have to move quickly. There's a few other interesting things about this map that are kind of weird. One being that there's fog ballista, which I really don't like. This map has both siege weapons in the fog as well as status staves in the fog. And so thankfully you have a torch staff and you have thieves and torches. Like you have Matthew, ideally. You haven't recruited Legal yet. But you have ways to at least reveal this, but it's still kind of a dick move on IS's part. In addition, with status staves, at this point, you haven't gotten a restore staff yet. So you really just have to like pray you don't get hit. Because if you do, you're going to sleep. Which I think is a really cool combo in line with the anti-turtle where you're rushing to this chest to like fight off the thieves that are going for it. Look at him stealing my lockpick like that, just completely neutered Matthew. You can see the sleep staffs coming in. What's really nifty though, so conceptually, I guess before I get into that, conceptually, right, what I like is that you're being forced to push and split in multiple directions. You have status staves coming at you to slow you down, which I really like. It's something that I do a lot in my own game, which I know not everyone likes, but I find it really fun to work around. But where it falls flat is that there's fog, which is difficult to deal with, and fog and status together is really a jerk move because the player can't plan around it without trial and error. And to make matters worse, you just haven't gotten a restore staff yet, so you have no recourse for dealing with it. Additionally, the thieves are so fast in the steal AI that they can just steal your stuff and you can't get it back. So there's a lot of like good intentions, but just poor execution. Because I think if you lowered the speed of the thieves and either reduced the fog, both reduced the fog, or got rid of the fog, and lowered the and gave the player a restore staff, they'd have a much easier time trying to figure it out, and it'd be kind of a clever puzzle to work through. And something that this chapter or that FE7 just doesn't have in general are these types of like anti-turtles coupled with coverage for the things you're chasing down. What is funny, though, and what makes the sleep really interesting to deal with in this chapter is that some of the enemies have poison weapons. And the way status works, and I learned this actually as I was playing this, is that if you get hit with another status while you're afflicted by a status, you then get infected with that status. So your strat is actually to put whoever gets asleep in front of a unit, an enemy unit, with a poison weapon, and then the poison weapon will wake them up, and then they'll be poisoned, which is much easier to deal with because they can still move around and stuff. So the best way to counter sleep is with poison, apparently, which I always just thought was very bizarre. But it's like a fun little trick, and I could see it being I could see this like this concept of messing around with the statuses by manipulating the AI being the kind of thing that would be cool as like a gimmick in a single chapter hack or in like a guide or something like that, where it's like very clearly spelled out as like, look at these fun little mechanical tricks you can do. Here it feels more just like an afterthought, like an accident rather than intentional. But given that you have no restore staff, this is going to be your best recourse to waking up early, provided you get hit by the sleep staff. So just a fun little trick there that's like not done at all anywhere else in the hack. In IS's hack. So the other thing too that I'll call out with this chapter that I found particularly cool is that you actually get a ballista early on. You can actually access a ballista here on the left hand side, which is super cool. You don't get many chapters where you actually get to use a ballista. So if you were playing with Will and Rebecca, here's your chance to get rewarded. Again, kind of like the idea of being able to chase down thieves with the ballista or just like clear out enemies ahead of you as you're charging with the ballista. It doesn't happen very often. And this chapter is one where you actually can execute on that idea. So it feels pretty unique, especially in the context of FE7. There aren't really very many chapters throughout all of Fire Emblem where you have a ballista and you're able to charge forward. I can think of like 3-1 in Radiant Dawn, where you're shooting with the ballista to cover the Lagoos that are charging on the other side, but you can't run with those ballista. This ballista you can run with a little bit through this like thin corridor area. And so you can actually like get some siege coverage, which is pretty cool and fun to play around with. Other than that, just like overall map layout, right? Like you have chests in different corners. I'm gonna just like zoom ahead a little bit here so you can see. Let's see here. I'm just gonna zoom ahead. There's Theodore. Theodore the Strike of the Black Fang. You will die now. Yeah, so he's got an Eclipse Tome, which is also just like a jerk move in the fog. I mean, thankfully it's not FE6 Eclipse, but again, like why are you giving your boss a siege weapon? But yeah, you can see there's a chest up here in that high corner area, and then there's the other corner, and the boss in the top corner. So just like this like 4-corner layout, I think is a really good tip for your maps, in that you have incentive to go to each side of the map. You have to go up to get the chest, you have to go right to get the chest, you have to go to the top right to get to the boss. So you have really like 3 paths to try and carve out. And I think that makes for some pretty compelling gameplay decisions and replayability, because you're always trying to think, who do I want to send to each of these to accomplish the goals? There are thieves going north and east. I need to chase them down. I need to split if I want to get everything in a single run. Not only that, I want to keep moving towards the boss so I can end the chapter in a reasonable turn count, assuming you want to play quickly. So there's a real incentive to split, and this is something that this game does not do very well, but there's a good lesson to be taken from that. And I think the general design and flow of the map is good and makes a lot of sense. Again, the thief stats, the fog combined with the siege weapons and the status staves, the lack of restore, make this really unfair. There's also some stuff in here like that thief on the top that doesn't move with like no white weapons. Like it really feels like an untested ROM hack. This chapter just feels super forgotten about, just like how Nurgle forgot about his kids. But it's really fun, and it's probably one of the most... I still think it's one of the best FE7 chapters despite its flaws, because of just how ambitious and different it was. Like, it really feels like a chapter from a different game. And I could see this chapter being in, like, an old FE7 ROM hack, or even, like, a more modern ROM hack. I just think there's a lot of cool nuggets to take away from this one. So, again, I do want to give IS credit for being super experimental and trying something very different. And I think that there's a lot of cool ideas to take away from this chapter. Execution-wise, you just want to make sure that when you're designing a chapter like this, that you give the player reasonable recourse against the threats that you put at them. Like, don't do Siege and Fog together because the player can't plan for it. Don't do status staves without a restore staff because the player doesn't have a counter for that other than waiting it out. It encourages turtling and slowing down. Don't put thieves on your map that are going to steal from you that you can't steal anything back from, because that's just a jerk move and going to encourage resets. So it's like, good idea, poor execution. Good idea, poor execution. Give the player a ballista. Great. Very cool. That's probably one of the best things they did. Too bad they don't give you any good archers at this point in the game, at least. Actually, I don't think there are any good archers in FE7. They're all kind of bad, especially because the bows are just bad in this game in general. At least the North American version. Actually, this footage is from when I was playing Hector hard mode with the Japanese effective system, so ×3 instead of ×2. So much better. Much better. But yeah. And then you got Theodore up here, Druid boss. Not really too much I'll say about him. Eclipse on the boss in the fog is really a jerk move. But I will just kind of zip ahead here. And so I'll show the death quote. Let's see if I could find it. Okay. Yeah, we'll show this. And then I'll let the end event play out so you can see it. Figured I'd just show that because it's probably something that most people won't see. I love giving kills to Marcus. This run was really fun for me, by the way. I used Bartra and Urk. I haven't played Hector Hardman in a long time. I have a lot of thoughts about it as a mode in general. But this chapter is just such a weird little reprieve from everything else in the game. So I'll heal up. And then... Okay. I think I go get this chest. Yeah, you can see like this thief, one of the thieves just does not move. It's so bizarre, dude. It is so bizarre. Okay. And then we'll show you the end event. So that about wraps this up. So that about wraps up this video. I didn't really have too much else to say on this map. I can't gush on it about it as long as, say, chapter 11, 11A of FE6. But I did want to just show it off real quick and talk a bit about what I liked, what I didn't like, and some ideas that you could take away. Like, the general flow of the map is interesting. I think it's good. The four corners thing, I think, is just a good practice in general when designing your maps. Give the player a reason to go to each corner of your map, and then you'll probably always have something to do in between. I feel like sometimes I play hacks and games, and the maps are really linear or don't encourage you to go into a particular area at all. And having a chapter like this where there's something to do in each corner of the map will incentivize splitting. There's an anti-turtle to go in each direction. And there's just a reason to play the map with a sense of urgency and not just like as a blob of one units going in a single direction. So I think it just makes for some more compelling gameplay decisions and replayability. Like, this is a chapter I always want to replay. Like, whenever I play FE7, I'm like, I'm going to play lid mode and get nils to level 7 because I want to play 19XX because it's one of the coolest chapters in the game. Power. And that about wraps everything up for this video, guys. But I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about chapter 19XX, A Glimpse in Time. Should be some cool takeaways here, some things to keep in mind. I certainly learned a little bit from playing it, and I wanted to just make this video to share my thoughts on it and how I might go about improving it if I were to create a similar type of map in my own work. But until then, guys, curious to hear your thoughts on this map, and we'll take it from there. Thanks again for watching. My name is Pandan, and I will see you next time for more.